Welcome to In Focus with Ejaz Haider. Let's begin with our top story tonight. Police in India have rounded up Muslim men and disrupted interfaith marriage ceremonies under new laws that prohibit what's come to be called love jihad. According to a recent report in the UK newspaper The Guardian, and I'm quoting directly from the report, love jihad is a Hindu right-wing conspiracy theory claiming that Muslim men lure Hindu women into marriage in order to force their conversion to Islam. Though the central government admitted in February it had no official records of any incidents of the practice, the theory has gained so much traction in India under the right-wing ruling Bharatiya Janata Party that it has been used to justify legislation enacted in Uttar Pradesh. It is now proposed in 4 other BJP-controlled Indian states. While Hindu vigilante groups have been agitating the issue for long, UP legislation now gives legitimacy to what was illegal vigilantism. The law was enacted in early December, the day after police raided the venue of a wedding between a Muslim man, Muhammad Asif, and a Hindu woman, Raina Gupta. The ceremony was to observe both Muslim and Hindu rituals. The families told the police they supported the union and that neither was going to convert, but the wedding was still prevented from going ahead. That incident put the recent spotlight on the love jihad theory, how and why it has been legislated, and the consequences of the move. To discuss this further, we have with Dr. Ritumbra Manuive, who is Executive Director of Foundation, a London Story, and is also a lecturer in international law at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. We also have Mr. John Dayal, who's a senior journalist, researcher, and human rights defender. Let me begin with Dr. Manuive here. Dr. Manuive, it seems to me that the term interfaith is a bit of a misnomer because this legislation seems to target exclusively marriages where the groom is a Muslim man and the bride is a Hindu woman. Is that sense correct?
Yes, in a way, and how we see the things unfolding in the state of Uttar Pradesh, it's actually pretty much to say that it is actually targeting the religious marriages per se, especially the Muslim and the Hindu marriages. And just to call it interfaith itself, it's also very, it's also very irrelevant in a way because marriages is something which has to be consensual between 2 adults, right? So how does it matter what faith a person belongs to? And
Correct.
We are very aware with what is happening in India right now. We can pretty much see that this is a Muslim and a Hindu marriage issues instead of anything else.
Right. Mr. Dayal is obviously on the ground, so let me pull him in on this. Mr. Dayal, as I said in my opening, so something which was generally considered unlawful vigilantism has now been legislated. What do you think are the consequences of that?
The consequences, I think, overwhelmingly would be to strengthen vigilantism and targeted violence against Muslims. Of this, there's no question, because this comes after and simultaneously, in a manner of speaking, with further bans on beef, with a total ban now on cattle trading, with illegal arrests in the last 1 year, with a whole slew of things you could say. And this seems to be the last straw. And this, in fact, although it's supposedly a law on love jihad, but it actually comes in the guise of an anti-conversion law, of which many exist in several states, directly targeting the Christian community and its clergy.
Dr. Manuive, is this something, India has long prided itself, and rightly so in many ways, on its inclusive secular constitution, and generally also one thought that there was a normative acceptance, if you will, of that secularism. Now, that seems to be under tremendous pressure now. It began with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's first tenure, but in the second tenure, it seems to have gathered a lot of steam. Is that something you would want to comment on and give our viewers a sense of how you think this inclusiveness is now under tremendous pressure?
Indeed. So with the first tenure of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and in fact, even prior to that, there has been a consistent rise of Hindu forces in India, and hindutva rather forces in India, and which have imagined India to be a Hindu nation of a single ideology. And that is indeed impacting the plural character of the Indian society and the democratic and secular values that India holds in the basis of its constitution itself. And we can see that after the second tenure, this has exponentially gone up, the sentiment to have a singular ideology or a singular religion or a singular culture has tremendously gone up. And this is, as my co-panelist also said, that this is not just a standalone event in the line of systematic oppression of the minorities that is happening in India right now.
Right. So since you mentioned that, and I think that's a valid point, which Mr. Dayal also made, there's also another phrase called ghar wapsi. And since we're talking about conversions, on the one hand, there seems to be an effort to ensure that no Hindu gets converted to another faith, while there's also an attempt to force Muslims or other minorities to convert to Hinduism. Now, how do you look at this kind of lopsided approach to conversions?
When you look at the very first episode, which got really highlighted, the Hadia case in 2009, you already see that the whole segment of ghar wapasi was already there. She was already kept in for 2 years into an institution where it was considered that, okay, she's going to return to home, re-indoctrinated to believe in our Hindu values and not marry a Muslim man. And those 2 years of torture is where the state intervened and said that she's, as an adult, free to marry who she wants to marry, but still the family intervened further in and took her in their custody. And now when we see from 2009 to now, 11 years later, we have an episode just very recently where a woman was again returned to some sort of an institution in the name of ghar wapsi. And she ended up having an abortion in that institution. So it's really, when you look at the human rights value involved, the human dignity involved, there is absolutely none taken care of it. And to say somebody that ghar wapasi, what does it mean? What is the ghar here? Is the ghar the plural India? Is the ghar the Hindu nation? What is exactly the ghar?
Right. So take that question to Mr. Dayal here. Mr. Dayal, what exactly is the ghar here, the home? What's the nature of this?
I have asked this question of them last 30 years because the presumption that they make is everybody born on this land is born a Hindu, which is not true for most of the indigenous people, the tribal people. In fact, in the Northeast, they weren't really even of the same ethnicity. They are Mongolites, and the large chunk of Indians is Caucasian and Dravidians. So it wasn't even true for them. And then to say that all Dalits, the former untouchables, were Hindus is rubbing salt in the wounds, because these were people that they were considered so low that a self-respecting or upper caste, so-called Hindu would be polluted if you were to touch them. And that's where a lot of Muslims and Christians come from, by the way. And then to suddenly think of them as Hindu would be a travesty. The Sikhs, for instance, are deemed to be Hindus under many of our income tax laws. And yet we killed thousands and thousands of them in 1984 in the most brutal manner. And the Sikhs resent being bundled under the larger label of Hindu. They say we are an independent identity, an independent faith. And that it goes on. So this ghar wapsi, so-called, is a coercive, fraudulent, and violent conversion. Exactly the three terms that they use to ban other people changing their faith.
Right. What I see is that, when this kind of thing actually becomes state-sponsored and you begin to legislate this, the kind of discourse that you and I are having here is something which, the space really gets shrunk for that, because, this whole thing then turns into street power backed by legislation. So my concern is that if this trend continues, the space for rational dialogue will become non-existent, and that's the point where you just can't do anything about it except the fate.
Something. I mean, if it comes down to technicalities, it is not state-sponsored. The law on the face of it does not say they're going to punish people who marry outside of the religion. But by implication, and the fact that the people, the politicians who have their hands on the levers of state power, and the fact that state agencies are complicit, and the fact that the power brokers, the activists of the ruling group are directly involved, that makes it, as with many other laws that target Christians and Muslims and Dalits and tribals, etc., the totality of it makes it extremely dangerous and totally wipes out the common civil ground in which negotiations for peaceful coexistence can take place. Just now, all minorities in India feel themselves under great pressure. The Muslims, the most of all.
Correct. And that's exactly the point that I was trying to make. I'm happy that you corroborated that. Thank you. That was John Dayal speaking with us. Let me go back to Dr. Manuive. Dr. Manuive, you are, you symbolize the many and increasing numbers of highly educated Indian women. And already South Asia, subcontinent itself, is an extremely patriarchal society, which is unfortunate. Now, there is clearly a great friction point here between educated women deciding to spend their lives the way they want it, study, marry, whatever they want to do, and this kind of patriarchy, which is now not only cloaked in religion, but has also been legislated.
Yes, indeed. So, as you know, that in the entire subcontinent of South Asia, arranged marriages is still a norm, which itself is a very patriarchal imposition on the right of the woman to choose for themselves, for their own sexuality, for their own partners, that who do they want to be with. And with this law of love jihad coming in a singular part of the country and perhaps also going to be enacted in another state, it really brings to the question that are we giving the woman the space that they deserve? Are we even treating them as an equal citizen, where the women are free not just to choose their partners or their families that they want to get married to or they want to live with, but also their own right to choose a religion itself? Yeah, I was raised into a Hindu family with a very wide secular values. I was not imposed into a religion. I was not told that this is just my religion. And I'm very fortunate for that. Yeah, but is this a right which is available to every woman in India? And in fact, in the entire South Asia? And the answer to that is no. Yeah, the right to choose your religion is not just not available to the women. There is an intersectionality there, of course, but it is also not available to men. Yeah, because we are what our parents were in a lot of ways.
No, absolutely. I couldn't agree more with you. Now, agreeing with what you're saying in toto, frankly, give me a sense of how you, both as an enlightened, educated woman, but also as an Indian scholar, when you look at what's happening, what are your feelings? I mean, you obviously, as I said, if this trend continues, it'll be, and we've seen this, I mean, we're witnessing this in other parts of the world. It's not something that, it's a slide which only gains momentum and shrinks the space, as I said earlier, for rational dialogue. So how do you feel as an Indian, as an enlightened, educated woman, how do you feel at what's happening in India today?
I do feel that the space is shrinking further for me as a woman, or for every other woman who's living in this country. The space is shrinking further. And I would say that this was not a very wide space to start with, because we always have to abide by the family culture, the family values. Even when I look back to my own college years in India, there have been a list of my own colleagues and friends and known acquaintances who have gone ahead to have a love marriage against the family wishes. Yes, and there have been a flurry of cases in the past, even before the love jihad came. There was a flurry of cases in the past, especially from the state of Haryana, from where I come from, of the cup and Tayat killing the boy and the girl for getting married outside of their, let's just say, caste. Mm-hmm. Right? And this space was already very limited. The space to be in love, the space to choose your partner, it was already very limited. But now with this love jihad coming in, and this legislation, the ordinance especially coming in, it has shrunken really, really further, and it has really become a feminist question instead of anything else. That can we allow this to happen as a woman? Can we allow a bunch of men, some of them who are not even married, to determine who we as women should choose to get married to?
Absolutely. Stay with me, Dr. Manuive. I'm also joined by Dr. Yaqoob Bangash, who is Assistant Professor of Modern South Asian History. Yaqoob, we're talking about this love jihad thing. Now, I know that you've done some work on this. Can you give us a brief background overview of what this is and how this supposedly unlawful vigilantism is now being legislated and being turned into laws?
Thank you, Ijaz. The background to this love jihad legislation is about 10 to 12 years old. So in about 2005 and 2006, and then again in 2009, there were some alleged cases in South India, in Karnataka, in Kerala, and in some other places. But what was very interesting was that it was very quickly found out that these fears were unfounded. These interfaith marriages that were taking place in Karnataka and other places were not incidents of forced conversion. Both spouses had, in fact, agreed to marry each other, and there was no question of conversion. And all this research has actually is pretty much public. The Criminal Investigation Department of the police even looked into it. The High Courts even looked into it, and it was very clear that these claims were unfounded. But of course, after that, because just the tag love jihad picks up pretty easily, and people really like it in that way, the BJP picked it up as part of its hindutva agenda. And since then, it has come up in a number of BJP-ruled states, including, of course, as we know now, very recently in Uttar Pradesh, in Madhya Pradesh, in Haryana, and in some other places. It is going to be debated very soon. And it's being misused almost immediately. I'm sure you know the case on the 2nd of December, where in Lucknow, a marriage between a Muslim man and a Hindu woman was impeded by the police, even though the whole families were actually there and they were about to celebrate the marriage. So this has become quite ridiculous, and I really hope that the Allahabad High Court in the UP and other high courts will actually take these cases up and declare them unconstitutional, because of course no one is there for forced conversion, but to assume that every interfaith marriage, which is not uncommon in India, which used to be a lot more common in earlier years, every interfaith marriage is an incidence of forced conversion is complete insanity. So one is that it will be completely illegal the way this law has been framed, and I'm sure that the courts will take this up. Secondly, I think this comes up as a very misogynist kind of a law, because it actually takes away the agency of women. If a woman is of age, she's 18 years and older, she can decide whatever religion she wants to follow or no religion to follow. It is her decision. There cannot be a law dictating that she must keep a particular religion. So I think it's a very bizarre kind of a law. That said, no one, of course, supports incidents of forced conversion. Forced conversion is is a real issue in India. But this kind of a law will do nothing towards forced conversion, and in fact will actually lead to vigilantism and prevent people who are in love and people who really want to get married. So this will actually this will have a very bad effect on family life of a lot of people, and will have a very detrimental effect on peace and harmony in India.
Right. Dr. Manuive, I'm sure you agree with everything that Dr. Yaqoob Bangash has said. But since he has mentioned the courts also, and you have a legal background, give me a sense of, how could someone petition the courts and say, well, look at this legislation, and can the courts overturn the legislation? How does that work?
So obviously, the courts in India have time and again stood by the idea of liberty and the personal liberty, so to say. But to just have that legislation going, just have that petition going, and being able to contest it into the court is a process which can take several years. It can mean different things for different people, because if I might remind you that there was a case again in the down south where the case was pending, and during the pendency of this case, the boy was killed by the members of the family of the girl. Yeah. So if it is going to be the process of the court, would it be swift enough and wide enough to cover those kind of threats to life, which are very evident when we are talking about anything to do with love jihad or cup and triads, or any sort of marriage vigilantism that is happening in India right now.
Right. Thank you so much. That was Ritumbra Manuive speaking with us. Before I wrap up, let me go back to Dr. Yaqoob Bangash. Yaqoob, is there, because this seems like a broader agenda, and there are other things like Ghar Wapsi and the rest of it. So just give us a sense of how these dots can be connected, within the larger sort of ambit of the hindutva agenda of the BJP.
Ijaz, the larger Hindutva agenda that you very rightly pointed out this is a part of is this great scare that they have actually begun to argue in India, and they have done it for a couple of decades now, that the Hindu majority in India is under threat. So this, it's this very, very bizarre kind of a concept that 75 to 80% of the population of India is under threat. So again, they want to scare the Hindus into believing that one day India will actually become a Muslim majority country, because of all these conversions and the Muslims having multiple wives and actually having lots of kids, which is again a very ridiculous idea. So this is a very clever and a very carefully orchestrated attempt to scare a majority into behaving like a minority, because these are the concerns of a minority. Minorities are usually scared of majorities, but here they want to flip the coin and make the majority be very scared of the minority, and therefore want to limit sort of the effect and the freedoms of minorities. So that's one point. Secondly, this is part of this larger agenda because Hinduism as a philosophy or as a religion, it's itself never used to proselytize and never used to expand itself. And I think in the last 30-40 years they've actually gone back on it, and the whole Ghar Wapsi idea thing, even though of course you can't convert and become a Hindu, they want to reverse it and say, well, originally of course you were Hindus and therefore you converted to some other religion, and now you are coming back to the Ghar Wapsi, you are coming back home. So they are now actually proselytizing through those kinds of things and trying to solidify their religion and actually go on the offensive, so to speak, because again the Hindutva agenda is to provide a very tainted history in which the Muslim is always the oppressor and the Hindu is always the oppressed, which was of course not that simple ever. So they want to push that kind of an agenda. And lastly, what they really want to do and make an example of is that they want to show to the minorities in India, beginning with the Muslims, but I think which is very clear is it's not just the Muslims. It's first the Muslims, yes, but then it is Christians, it is eventually Sikhs also, Jains, Buddhists, anyone that does not toe the Hindutva line will be under threat. And they want to use now Muslims as the largest minority there as an example that we will curtail your rights, we will curtail your civil rights, we will curtail your political rights, and now of course we will curtail your personal rights. You are actually now going to intervene in your personal realm. We are even going to prevent you from marrying whoever you want to marry. So this is a very dangerous kind of a situation that is happening in India. And sadly, as the other person was also saying, of course, the whole courts process takes a long time. But sadly, at this time, it only seems that unless the courts intervene, they are going to have their way. It is this law, this so-called love jihad law. Again, look at how it's been termed. It is called love jihad. So is it that only Muslims can convert Hindus? Can Hindus not convert Muslims or Christians or Jains or Parsis or Sikhs for that matter? So it's a very specifically worded law. It is a very, it is targeting a particular community, and it will scare them into further delegitimizing their identity as Indians, their nationality as Indians, and is going to create a very, a very bad scenario in India, where at the moment it is just there in about 4 states. It is going to expand to other BJP-ruled states, and it's going to make India into a very police state and a very regulated state where minorities would have no space either politically or in the civil realm. And even now, of course, through this law, even in the personal realm, even in their own house, they would not have any liberties.
Absolutely. Now, I'm left with very little time, Yaqoob. So very quickly, is this like a throwback to the Shuddhi Sanktan movements of pre-partition?
Yes, the roots of this is really amongst the whole revivalist ideals of Hinduism that came up in the late 19th century through the Shuddhi movements, through the Arya Samaj, interestingly headquartered in Lahore, where we are. And this harkens back to that. But at that time, I think the difference was that those movements were concerned about Hinduism as a religion. Hindutva as an ideology developed much later with Sarwarkar and the RSS and the Hindu Mahasabha and all of that. But at that time, it was a very much a Hinduism-based religion. They wanted to make it more kind of a religion. But then when Hindutva came up, it's this kind of a thing that, socialism in itself might not be a bad idea. But when it becomes National Socialism, as it happened in Germany under Hitler, then it becomes a deadly idea. So as long as it was, something very religious, something very reformative, because of course Arya Samaj had very good reform ideas. As long as it's that, and as long as it is about making things better for the people of your religion, it's a very welcome thing and it's a very good thing. But when it becomes this toxic political ideology that wants to eliminate anything else except this political ideology, that is when it becomes dangerous. And this is the sad part that India is now on.
Correct. Couldn't agree more with you. Thank you so much. That was Dr. Yaqoob Bangash speaking with us. We shall take a short break and return to discuss the increasing religious intolerance in India. Stay with us. Welcome back to In Focus. Our second story tonight is about increasing religious intolerance in India. Interestingly, despite a report by United States Commission on International Religious Freedom about growing religious intolerance in India, the U.S. State Department has not designated India a country of particular concern. The USCIRF is a U.S. federal government commission created by the International Religious Freedom Act of 1998. It also has commissioners which are appointed by the president and the leadership of both political parties in the Senate and the House of Representatives. The commission recommended that India be declared a country of particular concern and said that India has witnessed what it called the steepest and most alarming deterioration in religious freedom conditions. This observation is in line with findings by United Nations agencies, Human Rights Watch, Report, and Amnesty International. Stats show that 121 hate crimes were committed against Dalits, 40 against Muslims, 12 against Adivasis, 4 against Christians. At least 90% of religion-based hate crimes in the last decade occurred after Mr. Narendra Modi took office. In 2020, over 450 cases of attacks on the Christian community in India have been recorded. On the other hand, United States designated Pakistan, though it has taken positive steps, including the acquittal of Asia Bibi, reopening Shawala Teja Singh Temple in Sialkot to Hindus, and opening the Kartarpur corridor with India for Sikh pilgrims, among other steps. In fact, the Commission report mentioned several positive developments in its graph under that heading and noted that Pakistan is willing to engage in a dialogue about how religious freedom concerns can be addressed. The Commission did not find any positive developments in the case of India. To discuss this further, we are joined by Hena Zuberi, who leads the DC office of the human rights organization Justice for All, and Dr. Sumeera Imran, who's Assistant Professor of International Affairs at the National Defense University. Thank you to both panelists. Let me begin with Ms. Zuberi. Ms. Zuberi, clearly, this seems more about geopolitics than concern for human rights. I mean, the U.S. State Department should have designated India as a country of particular concern. In fact, the Commission's report has these recommendations to the U.S. government, and one of the recommendations is, in fact, to impose targeted sanctions on Indian government agencies and officials responsible for severe violations of religious freedom by freezing those individuals' assets and or barring their entry into the United States. Give me your reading of why the State Department would not designate India as a country of particular concern.
Yes, Justice for All was deeply disappointed by the state's ruling on this. We believe that this is a very uphill battle for human rights activists here in the United States, watching what is happening in India. Particularly, we're concerned, we work on anti-genocide causes around the world, including Burma, what is happening to the Uyghurs. And so looking at that, we worked on Bosnia. So looking at all of that, the reason why we're particularly concerned about this and believe that that India is headed towards the same authoritarian trajectory that has headed into. And but the State Department has made this decision based on the deep friendship President Trump has with Prime Minister Modi, but we don't expect much from the Biden administration that's coming in either. The reason why is, as you said, geopolitical choices. The U.S. needs a strong India to face the growing influence of China. So that is what our concern is over here.
Right. So interesting that you say that you're not expecting too much from the Biden administration either. I would want to ask you, why is that, given that President-elect Biden has had a very long record as a neoliberal, also a liberal internationalist, which is, essentially about intervening, sanctioning countries with poor human rights records. So you're not expecting much from the Biden administration in relation to India's deteriorating record, not just in mainland India, but also what's happening in the occupied and now illegally annexed Kashmir?
Yes, unfortunately, India has a very great reputation in the United States. It's done a lot of work on marketing itself, the land of yoga, the land of Bollywood. And the Biden administration itself, during the campaign, you saw Amit Jani, who has very close ties with the BJP, was appointed the Muslim outreach, the Asia Pacific outreach person, but also was given the Muslim portfolio. And so this was a signal to the American Muslim community over here that that perhaps some of our let's just say our concerns won't be taken as seriously. There was a big outlash, and then another Muslim person was appointed as an American Muslim liaison. We see people like Sonal Shah, who have previously been appointed by the Obama administration. So I feel like there's a lot of soft power that India has in the United States, which will stop any such a designation from taking place. It's a long road ahead. We understand that. We understand that a lot of education needs to take place at the grassroots level, at the think tanks level, and at the State Department too. I don't think the State Department can continue to ignore the atrocities that are taking place, especially this case of Father Stan, he's a Christian, 83-year-old Jesuit priest who's been taken up this interfaith law, the banning interfaith marriages law. So India is making it really hard for the United States to keep ignoring the religious freedom violations. But again, as I'll say this again, it's a long road ahead.
Right. In fact, I'm happy you mentioned this love jihad legislation because the first segment of this program was all about this. I mean, it's about not only delegitimizing the minorities in terms of their political rights or in terms of their social rights, but also in terms of their private spaces and their personal choices. But let me pull in Dr. Sumeera Imran into this. Dr. Imran, as Ms. Zuberi said, India has exercised soft power in the United States and generally in the West over a fairly long period of time, I'd say almost 2 decades. And it's going to be some time before that sheen comes off. But do you think that India is working hard at presenting itself as a not really liberal country, and that's something that we need to take advantage of?
It is suddenly that India has become significant on the U.S. radar. In fact, if we look at the Cold War era and even before that, at the time of independence as well, I think United States has remained clearly cognizant of India's geostrategic significance in the region. Its geographical, you see, it's the stretch of territory that it entailed. Also, in terms of the population that was there. So, and we also find, historically speaking, that there has been a significant economic assistance that has been given to India, despite the fact that Pakistan was part of the security pacts with the United States. So all the economic assistance that was given to India over the years, even during the Cold War era, reminds us that it was not that United States looked at Pakistan as a partner and did not have any idea of the importance of India as such in the region. It is only after the post-Cold War era that in fact, the calculation with the United States had been, even previously, how to engage India, and nuclearization of India, in fact, was offered an opportunity.
So you basically agreeing fact that there are these geopolitical concerns that will allow India to effectively sort of avoid the noose around its neck. But thank you so much. That was Dr. Sumeera Imran. Thank you also to Hena Zuberi for speaking with us. This is all from In Focus this week. We shall see you next Monday at the same time. Keep following our latest updates on social media at indus.news. Good night and goodbye.